Alright, guys. Hello and welcome to the stream. I am your host, Cassidy Streeter. And as you guys can see, I am going to do my first 32 team tier list of the season. Welcome to Cast. I am your host, Cassidy Streeter. And we are now beyond week 4, looking forward to week 5, starting tomorrow, with the Bears visiting the Washington Commanders. But before we get to that, I do want to say that what an exciting week of football. And I think that this week will be exciting still, and that I'm really looking forward to it. But first, the tier list. I will be going off cam for this. Oops, I didn't mean to have the Chargers there. They are not the number 3 team. Anyway, with this, I am going to say that I'm going to be recording this. So if you do chat, keep in mind that I am not going to respond until after I am done recording this. And know that the way that I'm going to do this is I'm not going to go in chronological order from 32 down to 1 or anything like that. I'm going to kind of do it randomly. That is kind of why I put the Chargers up there first. Obviously, with this sort of thing, I think it'll be more fun if I don't go in chronological order and instead make it a little bit spicier. I'm honestly probably going to save 1 to 8 for. I'm going to save 1 to 8 for the end, but 9 through 32 are going to be kind of. They're gonna be, done first. But with that, let's start the tier list. Starting off, I have the Chargers, and not to disappoint anybody with these guys, but I really think they haven't lived up to the expectation this year. They've won their last 2 games. They started 0-2. I do think that they've gotten better. I kind of expected the Vikings to, it was a close game and all of that, but I kind of expected the Vikings to probably win that because they've essentially, scored, many points in every game that they're in. But the Chargers, I do think, I think that they're better than most teams in the league, but they just aren't consistent enough for me to consider them super, super high. So with that, I'm going to put the Chargers at 13 here. The main reason for this, and I'll keep these descriptions brief, is that the Chargers, well, I think that Herbert has proven he is an elite QB. The defense of this team is still pretty suspect. Even though the Vikings, the last team that they played, obviously, put up a lot of yards, against them. The Vikings have seemingly done that quite a bit. And you could even argue that it's like if Kirk Cousins wasn't, such a master at throwing away games, that this team probably wouldn't have won. They probably wouldn't have won last week. You can't say that for certain, but it's just crazy to me, or I guess that was the week before. I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know what I'm saying actually anymore. The Chargers was the week before the Vikings won this last week. So I'm sorry for citing, games from, a while ago. But you know, you could argue this team could be 1-3. It was definitely, the kind of crazy thing where it's like the Vikings were vying for a win. Each team kind of knew that they needed to win. They were both 0-2 at the time. But then you also look at the Chargers last week and they won, but it wasn't, commanding. And I guess the thing is that they were going up against the Raiders. The Raiders, who are just not a very good team this year. But, and they only won by a touchdown. Granted, I get it. It's still a division game. It's still tough. But the Chargers kind of need to prove that they are able to win and command at home, which 24 points isn't, terrible, but it's very average to me in today's league. But yeah, the Chargers, I really think, they could do a lot better. But with that, moving on, I'm going to kind of get this out of the way. Yeah, I'm going to kind of get this out of the way here. Let me see. This next team that I, have, I kind of want to give them a little bit of props for. And that will be the Cardinals. This team, looking at them, they've played a lot better, I think, than a lot of people would give them credit for. It's, kind of astounding what they've been doing. It's kind of astounding what they've been doing. Sorry, 1 second. It's kind of astounding what they've been doing, to be honest with you. And I think that they just deserve to be given props. I'm not putting them at 21. I'm still kind of thinking about it, even though I've thought about it quite a bit. I think that the Cardinals are the 22nd best team in the league right now. I think that there is a good amount of teams that are worse than them with how scrappy they've been playing. I just don't think, and against good teams, no doubt, it's just been, it's just been really crazy to see what they've been able to do. Even a 49ers team who, yes, they scored 35. Yes, they only scored 16. The Niners are a team that should, with the way that people were talking about, they should easily sweep the Cardinals. This kind of reminds me of even in week 1 when, you had the Cowboys whoop on the Giants. Granted, that's a divisional game, but this is also a divisional game, and these two teams obviously know each other pretty well. But the Cardinals, on paper, it is not good, but they have been overproducing and making teams earn their win. We kind of knew last week that, yeah, they're going to be, a good team, the Niners, but it's like Christian McCaffrey just seemingly has been proving that he's being utilized to a point where it's to perfection, where he is the star of that offense. And then you have, Debo Samuel and Ayuk, who are both great players and great compliments. The same with Kittle, arguably the second best in the league, tight end in the league. And of course, that O-line is nothing too shabby either, which makes it a little bit easier to McCaffrey. But he is just, you can't take away from McCaffrey because of the line, because of his vision, his athleticism, and his determination to, get every single yard he can. So, I mean, this is why I'm placing the Cardinals kind of high, because you can't teach the spirit that the Cardinals have. This team is motivated to prove that the players deserve a roster spot. And for that, I think that, the Cardinals deserve to be a lot higher than a lot of people would have them because of the way that they've played. Moving on, though, to the next team, I am going to go ahead. I am going to go and I'm going to select a team that, personally I don't really like too much, and a lot of people are going to probably be, somewhat mad at me for this, with the Vikings and where I put them. But I personally feel as though the Vikings, even though it's like they're 1-3 now, they obviously had, they've had a lot of turnover problems. I just think that this team needs to look at themselves, and I'm going to put them at 19 here. I think the Vikings, their turnover issues, they could easily have been, I feel like they could have easily been top 10. Top 10 in the league. Looking at this, and it just, it kind of shows that, turnovers can ruin a team. They're 1-3. Who even knows if they're going to win their next game? They obviously just beat the Panthers, but it's like the Panthers, I mean, goodness. And this week, they have a challenge. They do play the Chiefs, who haven't looked the best. But the thing about the Vikings, too, is that they lost their first 2 games at home. So, the fans are probably overall just very disappointed. And the Chiefs, you look at teams like the Chargers in their division, and they're not going to want to lose this game, potentially be, tied for records with the Chargers and that sort of thing. So, this might be the game that they really need to get their offense going, because the Vikings have had arguably, a top 5 losing defense, And it's like, while the Chiefs haven't been scoring by a high mark, they are still, net points above, the points given up. They've only given up 60 points in 4 games, which is pretty damn good, if you ask me. The Vikings, and I mean, Andy Reid, I'm sure, is going to have a game plan for Justin Jefferson. He's not a guy who, he's not a head coach that is just going to let one guy tear their entire team apart. And, the Chiefs run crafty defenses, and I mean, it's a very underrated group. They don't have a lot of star talent, but they are doing very well for themselves. in the regard that they haven't, they bend but not break mentality. So that's why I'm going to put the Vikings at 19. I just don't really think that they have proven too much. Moving on, though, the next team I'm going to cover is actually the Jets. I think the thing with the Jets that you think about is that they just played the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I totally watched the game. I'm not lying. But the Jets, looking at them and the way that they have been, their defense still proves that they're one of the best. And I mean, I don't think it was any fluke that they picked off Mahomes. I think that they got inside his head. I think that they played really well. The thing is Zach Wilson also kind of exposed their defense a little bit, showed that he can make some throws, and play, a pretty good ball game. Obviously, it's hard to become a high scoring offense, instantly when you try to get in rhythm, but this team has struggled offensively, and then ironically enough, they had a chance to win, but Sauce Gardner, the most unlikely, I guess, PI player, I feel like, that team, to commit a PI, commits a PI, which ultimately sinks any chance they have to win the game. Otherwise, I feel like, 90 out of 100 times, I think that Sauce Gardner defends that and doesn't make that. But for them to, compete, they have to cut down on these mistakes, and they do need to play the way they played against the Chiefs in order to get winning ball and minimize their mistakes. I'm going to say the Jets. I think, I'm going to rank them actually right above the Vikings. I think that they've kind of shown that it's like they are a kind of bottom of the pack team, but this team can move up. This team can move up, on the standings, I think, if they start to pull it together. And I think Zach Wilson showed enough that they shouldn't be thinking about trying to acquire another QB or sign a QB. Moving on to the next team, I actually do want to cover the worst team in the NFL. I think that the worst team in the NFL right now, and this probably won't come as much of a shocker, or maybe it will. I mean, and who knows? Who knows? This might be a really hot take, but I'm going to say, and I'm not going to say the Bears. I know that a lot of people are saying the Bears, with all their dysfunctionality, are the worst team in the league. I'm not going to say that. I'm actually going to say that the Broncos are the worst team in the league. The main reason for this is because their defense from last year to this year, they were the sixth most efficient, and that was with how much they needed to be on the field. And it's just last season and now this season, even though the offense is producing better, I don't think that they're very good. I think the fact that they came back against the Bears, but they looked extremely vulnerable. Like, the Bears looked like they wouldn't quite necessarily have a day like the Dolphins had, a historic day, of course. But you look at the way the Bears handled them, and then they had a second half drought. Yeah, that means that, they they adjusted. But in my opinion, it just kind of shows that, maybe this team was fearful, honestly, of being this embarrassed by beating by the Bears. The only way I think it would have been worse is if it was at Mile High in Denver where this was happening instead of Soldier Field in Chicago. But the Broncos' run defense and their defense overall has looked terrible. I think that they can lose to just about anybody. And it's like, you look at the Bears and then you look at the Commanders. Howell does kind of look like he has the potential to be the guy, but it's like nobody expected the Commanders to be that good offensively. Even though they have, Scary Terry, who's a perennial threat, and their main guy, you just look at the way the Broncos have played, and it is wildly inconsistent. You could say the same about the Bears, but the Bears have had locker room issues. Maybe the Broncos are having those as well. I mean, all of this talk from Sean Payton, I think is, maybe possibly karma. And when your coach is that cocky or believes all this stuff and then your team doesn't produce, it's a shame to them. And yeah, the Broncos, I personally think that they are the worst team in the league, even though there are two teams that are 0-4. I've liked seeing what I've seen from the Panthers, and the Bears have looked, to me, better at times than the Broncos. And they're a younger team. Like the Broncos are, they have, they don't have a ton of young talent. The young talent that I think about is Patrick Surtain, but he's been, this is his third season in the league, third or fourth season. And while he's a great player, he's not going to help with the run defense. And if teams know they can run on you, Patrick Surtain's value essentially goes, down the chimney. And it doesn't, strike home, even though he's a great player. So yeah, the Broncos are my worst team due to the fact that they, more people were speaking highly of the Broncos this offseason, and, they almost lost, and they've looked really bad against bad teams, which I think is, the Bears, the way the way that they've been having things, go, you'd think that they would be losing every game and scoring, less than 10 points every single game or something, but that hasn't been the case. And to nearly, whoop the Broncos, who barely beat them, it's just crazy to me. Moving on, I do think that we will cover the Bears next, and I think that the Bears, I think that they are the 31st worst in the league. Goodness, why is their logo so small? But, the Bears, with all of their off the field issues, it hasn't really shown much to me of what they're capable of. Although Fields finally looked comfortable when they played the Broncos. Obviously, they didn't do much in the second half. But, Fields looked like the guy that they honestly looked like the guy that people were saying like would be an MVP candidate before the season started, and before they kind of showed that, oh yeah, the coaching staff wants to change the way that he plays and all of that. And I'm not going to get into it because it's, it's like beating a dead horse at this point. The Bears have been, just bad. But it's like they kind of showed, I don't know, and it's kind of what I predicted. I honestly kind of predicted that I thought the Bears might beat the Broncos, and barring the fact that the Broncos actually did hold them pointless in the second half, they win that game. And it's like, I personally think that it's like it's hard to get out of the slump in 1 week, but the fact that they showed, better than the Broncos. I personally don't care if like, oh, well, how can you rank the Bears higher than the Broncos? They've been through so much more turmoil. And I think that with that last week and then going into the next week, they can actually have things to build off of. But the Broncos, they still look like they can get stomped any given day of the week, with the way that their defense plays sometimes. So moving on to the next team. I think that I'm going to cover my Packers here. Oh, and goodness, why is that? Oh my goodness. Apparently I don't have a Apparently I don't have a Packers logo here. Give me 1 second. So my Packers, I think that the thing that I look at with my Packers is that the run defense has been pretty bad. The offense has been very inconsistent, albeit good when it is good. The major takeaway I have against the Lions is that they're getting pummeled all game and it's just going nowhere. But then the 2 touchdowns that the Packers did get after their 3 points to get 17 to bring it to a 24-17 game where they have a shot to at least tie it. I think that you got to think about how you got to think about that and how this team, oh, what in the world? Okay, I totally just screwed this up. Goodness. Okay. Goodness me. Okay, moving on. We have moving on. There we go. So we have the Packers. And I personally feel like, we've been underperforming. The defense has shown that the pass rush is pretty good, which doesn't surprise me with all the guys that we have at depth there. A lot of them, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith looks like he's playing, with more energy this year. And then you also have Lucas Van Ness, who is getting, very limited snaps. But you got Kingsley and Egbari and, several other guys that, are playing very well. I think the Packers are a very middle of the pack team. I don't think I can really rate them too high. I'm going to put them here at 16. I'm going to put them here at 16 because I think, when they're good, they're doing really good. But when they're bad, it's bad. A lot of 3-and-outs and a lot of pressure. I personally think that the last week it would have been a closer game if they weren't calling so much of the same kind of plays over and over again. But the line wasn't holding up some plays to give Love any time to make any reads. A lot of these play actions. But barring that, I think that when they scored their 2 touchdowns, they looked like a, well-oiled offense with a guy who's going to lead them down the field to win games. And if they can do that for, even 70% of their drives, you can always come away with points. Our young kicker, Anders Carlson, has been, doing really well. And it's astonishing because when he was coming into the league, he was known to have a big leg but be wildly inaccurate. And like I said, the defense has been playing, pretty well. Even, against the pass, getting good pass rush, getting good pressure, forcing turnovers. Obviously, you saw Goff throw a pick on the first drive. And that was, the extent of, how he played poorly, that game. Whereas, later in the game, he was kind of getting stopped. But, I feel like he benefits from a really strong run game and a very dominant O-line. But, yeah, the Packers, I think the play calling just needs to be better. If the play calling's a lot better, I do believe this is a top 10 team. I don't think the jury is out on Love yet of, whether he's going to be the guy. But I think when he is good, he's shown that he's as competitive and skilled enough to lead a team. And that's why the guys believe in him. But until you can get some consistency, then you're gonna be a middle of the pack team where you're gonna be a 50-50 team. Obviously, I'm not putting them there because they're 2-2, but I do think it's a 50-50 thing. So that's why they are at 16. Moving on, I think the next team that I'm going to cover, I think, is I'm trying to think. I think I'm going to cover the Texans. The Texans this year have found their franchise QB. I don't think they're going to need to search for one in a long while. The Texans, from looking at them, are not quite a top 10 team. They're kind of itching on it. But I think that their team is, pretty well rounded, where a lot of their players aren't very well known yet. But I think that Stroud knows what he has. And I think that he's shown that he's a guy you can definitely rely on, and he's going to be able to play at a high level for a while. For that, I am going to put them slightly above just above the Chargers here at number 12, because I think that the Texans, have a good a potentially great QB. I don't want to say after 4 games that he's a potential Hall of Famer, even though it's like this with the stats he's thrown up and the touchdowns that he's got. I think that, he's off to a really good start already. My favorite for Rookie of the Year. And, the potential is there. They haven't scored a ton of points, but they're not scoring a meager amount either. There's other teams that are in worse situations. But yeah, the Texans have been kind of a surprise to me. I do think that history favors the bold, and they were bold in the draft. They got two players that are going to be immediate impact players and cornerstone players with Anderson and Stroud, and things are looking up for the Texans because they got a guy who I think is going to be a very solid head coach in the league for a while, the defensive coordinator of the 49ers last year. And yeah, overall, I think the Texans, they could move up in this list the further the years goes on. And honestly, at this point, I'm kind of picking them to win the division because the Jaguars haven't really taken the step that I, have expected. And I mean, with that, we're going to move on to the Jaguars. The Jaguars, to me, the problem with them is that they have not improved the way I thought they would. I don't think it's all Lawrence. This last week they did win a game in London, but I feel like, with the way the Jaguars are, I think that they personally, I think that personally, the whole London thing is almost like a home field advantage for them. And clearly, the Falcons were, they've had a rough last couple of weeks. And maybe teams are just figuring out how to play them, to be honest with you, and their run game. And Ritter's turnover problems just aren't great. Because, I mean, Bijan Robinson did have 105 yards off of 14 carries. But if you can't capitalize and score touchdowns, then you're just going to have problems. And this, I mean, the thing about the Falcons is it's kind of a letdown. Start off the season 2-0. Have a pretty good team now with some good veterans, good players, well-rounded offensive unit. But, they just haven't, and they looked like they were playing really scrappy, really good football. But all of a sudden, these last 2 weeks, it's in doubt of whether or not they can get anywhere because the QB, Ritter, seems to have been found out. And the thing about the Jaguars to me is that they could be first in their division with a 3-1 record if they had been able to pull out the win over Kansas City. But they weren't able to capitalize on that sort of thing, and it just kind of shows that against, a good team, like the Chiefs, who I still believe are, Super Bowl contenders even with the way that they've been playing, because they always get better later in the year for the postseason, and they seem to be kind of, dwindling around this year with how they're playing. Before that, the Jaguars, I am going to put at 14. I think that, their team is good, but I just don't think that they've proven enough to where, you can put them that high, and Lawrence, I'm just not quite understanding what problems he's having. Maybe it's the O-line, but, moving on from them, I'm going to pick the Colts since we seem to be covering all of the AFC South teams. The thing about the Colts to me is that Richardson is an exciting young QB, but he also seems to be kind of reckless, I guess. I think that this team has good spark, even without Jonathan Taylor, the running back. I think that this team has shown that they can, play through adversity. But I don't think that they're that much better than some of these other teams. I don't think that their defense is as good, and I mean their offense seemingly, has some spark, but the Colts, I think that they just have a lack of star talent, right? And that's just never a good thing in today's NFL. I'm not saying that the teams with the most talent always win, but they seemingly got outplayed by the Rams in this game by a better coach and all of that. And it's like Stafford threw for quite a bit of yards on them. They couldn't stop the run very well. Puka Nakua is, honestly, Puka Nakua could very well run away with Rookie of the Year from Stroud. He's my other player that it's like, oh yeah, this guy, he's a gifted player, and he seems to be way better than, anybody, thought of. It's like 163, yards, nine receptions, and only 10 targets. Goodness, you have Tyler Higbee with just one more target, but obviously, 5 receptions, and he's got 64. Obviously a tight end, but Puka Nakua is carrying this offense by himself. And I don't know when Cooper Kupp is going to come back this year, but it's just, it's just crazy to me how quick the Rams have rebounded from a disastrous season last year. And it's all thanks to, I guess, Puka Nakua and the Stafford connection, But yeah, looking at the Colts, you have Anthony Richardson, throwing for 200 yards with only 11 completions, which is big. But then you look at his completion percentage, and it's a couple of, receptions up, below 50%. And then, on his legs, obviously he's good. 10 carries for 56 yards. And I think he's only going to get better, hopefully, with the right coaching. But yeah, the Colts, to me, it's going to be hard for them in a division where just about any team could win it. The only team I'm really kind of counting out maybe is the Titans, because I just think that, they started off the season 0-2, won their last 2 or whatever, but it's, it's been really, really rough, for the Titans, I guess, relying on trick plays already with Derrick Henry in order to, secure points. But, looking at the Rams, I think that it's like I said, I think the Colts, they have a lot to improve on, but they're not very far behind. Even my Packers, like, I think that, Richardson is a gifted player and can, pose a really big problem for a good number of defenses. Now we'll go to the last team, the Titans, in this division. And the Titans, to me, the problem with them is they don't really have a true wide receiver threat. They still have Tannehill as their QB, who's only getting older. Derrick Henry had a rough go of it before last week. And this team just hasn't evolved at all. That's why I think that they're the worst team in this division. I think that, they're better than, these bottom tier teams. I think they have more experience, and they have, a decent amount of star talent on their team with Simmons, obviously King Henry. Tannehill is still not a bad quarterback, but I just think that with him aging and all that, it's just, it's just not a very good thing. He's going to lose more and more mobility, which I think is a focal part of his game. But yeah, he's up there in age. He's like part of the 5 oldest QBs in the NFL, I think. And it's like, especially, if Rodgers, if you don't include Rodgers because he's not playing right now, you've got like Cousins, Stafford, Tannehill, Garoppolo, and it's just like, there's a lot of young QBs obviously in the league right now. Like, we've been blessed with a lot of, pretty good young QBs, young talent recently. But yeah, the Titans to me just don't, there's just not a lot of wow with them, is the problem. Like, I like Derrick Henry, but it's like, it's hard to win games with just a star back anymore. So that's why I'm going to put the Titans just above the Cardinals. Moving on, I think we'll cover this, this team next, the Patriots. I think the Patriots look a lot better than they did last year. Yes, they just got whooped by the Cowboys, but I think that because the thing is I think that they went up against an angry Cowboys team that absolutely got it handed to them. The week before. And I think that this is a team that can win against, several others. But I do think that, you're looking at the you're looking at this team, and Mac Jones definitely looks revitalized. He's not making terrible throws. He is a game manager style QB where it's like, he's the kind of guy that it's like, yeah, you're only going to, maybe want one, maybe one pick a game from, because if he's throwing multiple picks, you're just going to lose because you're not a high scoring, high flying offense. Well balanced offense, I think, but then you see that they're trading for JC Jackson, which is pretty bold in my opinion, and I think kind of unorthodox. You don't really see the Patriots and Bill Belichick trading for those kinds of guys. But yeah, JC Jackson trade, I think that they traded him because JC Jackson was, he was disgruntled with the Chargers, probably because of their defensive struggles. And yeah, they traded him back, after they signed him, and he signed this big deal, and crazy to think how, Jackson ended up this way. He goes to their team because I do believe that the Chargers could be a Super Bowl contender if they let up a little less points, But yeah, the Patriots getting him back, I think, only helps their team. He knows the system. He's going to be able to go there. And if he plays to the potential that he did, when he essentially earned his money, it's going to be huge for the Patriots, especially since their secondary is so banged up, but the Patriots, to me, they're kind of in that phase where it's like this team's ceiling isn't very high, but they can win games because they have a good head coach and they're well coached. That's about the most that I can say about the Patriots. But looking at some of these other teams, I'm going to move on, and I'm actually going to go and I'm going to look at the Bengals right now. The Bengals, to me, it is crazy how inconsistent they are. But this is a team with obviously an elite level quarterback. I don't care what anyone says, that is what Joe Burrow is. He's an elite level quarterback. They have just kind of, struggled mightily. They have struggled mightily. But I am going to put them up at 15 here. I think that they essentially could go up. I think right now, you look at them and it's like Burrow was banged up. Their line has actually been doing a pretty good job of protecting him. But he obviously, with his injury, you just don't think that, he's performing the way he should. But hopefully they improve. This next week, if you look at it, they're going up against the Cardinals, and this is the week for them to kind of prove that they can be legit. They're obviously going to, State Farm Stadium in Arizona. But the Bengals, if they lose to the Cardinals here, I'm not going to say that that's, the gut punch to end their season. Yes, they'll have 4 losses, so only, only a 13 wins tops, for the season, which, if you're sitting at 13 wins, you're pretty cozy, but winning out on the year is going to be really tough in a stacked AFC, where you have division matchups that it's like, you're not guaranteed to win against the Ravens, the Browns, and the Steelers, even though the Steelers are struggling right now. But yeah, this is kind of a game where it's like, it can definitely be the game where, the Bengals are essentially, everyone's going to want to beat them. No one's going to want to lose to the team that loses to the Cardinals, and looks this bad this early in the season. And, that sort of thing can create, animosity through the locker room, making the players, maybe not play as hard because they're like, this season's essentially over and it's an uphill battle. It's really discouraging when even though the Cardinals have been playing scrappy, it's really discouraging when you lose to a team like that. But the Bengals, yeah, they could easily move down. I know that they're 1-3, and placing them, in the top 15 might seem outlandish, but I do think that they are a better team than they've shown. And they still, I'm mainly putting them here because I think that their QB, their run game, their offense is still really good. And they just need to start performing and having it click the way that it did last year. But moving on, the next team I am going to cover is actually the Saints. The Saints, are 2-2. And this week they go up against the Patriots. And I think that the Saints win this game, but I think that they do need to start producing, better throughout, because their defense looks seemingly invincible, but now they have lost 2 straight. They are in a division that is pretty winnable. I think of this division as the same as the AFC South. Funny because it's the NFC South here. But the Saints, I am actually going to put at number 11 here. And the reason for that is I think that if they can channel the way that they have played, with that defense, I think that they have enough veteran leadership that, they could definitely start to break through. Like, I think with the return of Kamara, They really need to strike that balance. Taysom Hill is another mismatch problem. They obviously have Olave, and Michael Thomas hasn't gotten injured yet, even though I'm really not a believer in him because he can't stay healthy. And I think he's I don't know. I think that he's one of those that he's really just playing for the money and not the love of the game. I still think he is a talented wide receiver. I just don't like him as a person. And, the Saints have everything they need, I think, to do well. And thank goodness Derek Carr's injury wasn't for too long, but I think that he fits in their system the way that they play. And he does well enough to where, they're not going to win games because of him. I think that the other players on the offense have way more star talent to make him look better. Thomas and Olave, as well as Kamara, and then even Taysom Hill, at times. But this is a team with a very good defense that has always been very opportunistic. And I think that that's, an underrated spot for the Saints. Going on and looking further, I'm trying to see what teams I haven't really covered. I think I'm just going to go and I'm going to pull up the Raiders. The Raiders are having an abysmal season. The fact that they have one win, I think, is, a blessing. It is a blessing for the Raiders to have. I am going to put them at 30 because I think even though Davante Adams is clearly disgruntled, he's still going to play. Their defense seemingly doesn't have, a decent secondary. The linebackers are not the greatest. And then it's like you have Max Crosby on the D-line. About sums up their their defense, where it's like it's mostly Max Crosby. But you can't get it done with one guy on defense. Even the Rams, even though they have I still think that, Donald holds the edge a little bit over Micah Parsons because he does so much. Even though it's very close right now. Obviously, Donald has done it for so long, and Parsons it's his third year in the league. So it's like the longevity isn't there yet. But, you look at Aaron Donald and he's the greatest defensive player in the game right now. And he's not even able to carry the Rams defense by himself. So the Raiders, I just don't think have the capability to win that many games. Watch it be karma and it bites me in the ass when they play my Packers next week. And you obviously, even though Davante Adams is still producing and had a slight shoulder injury last week, him being disgruntled, he's a dog. He's going to keep competing. I don't think he really has quit in him, but he is clearly unhappy because the team just isn't playing well. And Garoppolo is throwing interceptions like I've never seen him throw before, which is not good coming from a guy who doesn't provide anything else but the ability to throw the ball, essentially. So yeah, the Raiders are at 30. Moving on, the next team that I am going to cover is going to be the Giants. The Giants, the main issue with them, and this is probably the only issue that I see on this team, is their O-line. Their O-line's inability to protect a guy who is, honestly, I think, I would probably say, if I thought about it a bit, that Daniel Jones is probably top 5 in mobility. He is top 5 in mobility in, for the league. I don't think that you get many guys that are as fast, as mobile as him, and as big as him. The only other guy I can think of that's maybe, as big And obviously faster is Richardson, and he just entered the league. And maybe Josh Allen, but him and Josh Allen are obviously the best runners. Otherwise, I think that the Giants, could be a good team. Even without Saquon, they've proved that they can still run the ball respectably, still have a pretty good defense, even though they need to get more pieces, I think. But yeah, I'm not going to be able to list these guys, too high. Thinking about this, I'm going to list them at 24. And that's my official placement for them. Moving on, I think I'm going to cover another team from this division. I am going to cover the Commanders. And the Washington Commanders have played a lot better than I think a lot of people, thought. I think that the Washington Commanders have, a top 10 wide receiver, maybe top 5, because I feel like we haven't even seen, how good Scary Terry could be with a good QB. Maybe, gosh, I'm forgetting his name right now. I mentioned it earlier. Maybe the guy that they have right now is the guy. But overall, I think that Washington, has overproduced. And I think that they have, a pretty good defense. I think Young and Sweat are both really reliable pass rushers. Hopefully Young can stay healthy. And I think it only goes upward from there. Even Deron Payne, is a very good D tackle with, very strong, at pass rush. So they have a very good pass rush, which is a formula I think that wins in today's league. I think in today's league, it's more important to have a good D line than just about anything else on the defense. You look at the 49ers. Sure, they have good opportunistic corners and linebackers, but overall, the identity of that defense is their D line. And I think that that's always a great thing to have when you have guys. Now, Chase Young could still, emerge and hopefully return to where he was, the number 2 overall pick and emerge as, a physical freak in time because he was out and missed a good amount of time because who knows how bad his injury was, or if they were just being patient because they want him, to be good. But, I just remember the QB's name, Howell, I think looks like the real deal 4 games into the season. So the Commanders, things can only hopefully get better from here for them. And they've been playing better than I think a lot of people give them credit for. Moving on, what do we have 5. We have 5 left in the bottom here. Let me see. I'm actually kind of looking at my list, and I'm thinking I want to bump some teams down, to be honest with you, because I think I'm looking at the Rams, and I'm thinking the Rams, they've kind of proven that they're a better team than anybody realizes. So the Rams, I do think, I think I'm going to move down a couple spots from most of these. So sorry for that, you guys. This is kind of a rough. And I think I am going to move the Cardinals down, I guess, a little bit. But overall, the Rams, I think, they've kind of proven that they're, going to more than likely be a capable team. and then in the future here. But yeah, thinking about this, I think that the Rams, they may not be as good as the Chargers here, but I do think that they are, a respectable team right now, and they're going to inch their way into the top, 50% of the league. I think that they're in too tough a division to actually do well, to be honest with you. But overall, this team, I think, has kind of proven that they deserve to be considered at least, potential playoff contenders at this point, with their revitalized team. But there's not much to say. Stafford and Puka Nacua have got it going. Puka Nacua arguably could be the biggest steal of this draft at this point, obviously. But they obviously have a pretty stout defense still. Aaron Donald, like I said, I still think he's the best in the league because he does so much. He plays the run well as, obviously pass rushing. I think that Micah Parsons isn't far behind because he's also a generational talent. But Aaron Donald's been doing it for a long time. And he seems to be really enthusiastic about the game, where he's really friendly and all of that, with his teammates, as a good mentor and a good team player, even though Puka Nacua was apparently scared of him, in training camp. Going to another team, I don't have much to say about the Rams. I think that we all know about what they've been doing this year. The next team that I want to cover is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, I thought, coming into the year, had done enough so that they would potentially be a good team. Obviously, the hard thing about the AFC is that it is so, unbelievably stacked that, it's hard to gain recognition and, advance in the league. But I personally think the Steelers have just they've kind of, dwindled their talent. I do think that, Kenny Pickett's been struggling. I don't know if he's even the guy. If they continue to struggle like this, I could definitely see them drafting a quarterback next year. I think that he was taken primarily because he went to Pittsburgh for college, and they thought that he was going to be a fan favorite, but he was, arguably, looked pretty good, but wasn't, graded high or anything, and he definitely wasn't like a top prospect type of thing where you'd expect him to be better. But the Steelers, to me, have plenty of good players. They just aren't living up to expectations. And they just got stomped by the Texans, a team that does look like they're on the come up, but the Steelers just kind of looked like they were passed by the Texans this offseason. When the Texans were honestly the worst team in the league last year. I'll say it. There was nothing going for the Texans last year, and they've, astounded with how well they have played now. Looking at the next team that I want to talk about would be the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons, as embarrassed I am to say that my team lost to them, I personally think that they have been kind of found out. And it looks to me kind of crazy, I guess, the lack of ability of this team. Bijan Robinson looks like a tried and true halfback. But this kind of leads me to the point of the Titans, where Derrick Henry is a proven back. But the running back position, even with a guy like, Bijan, and then you look at, McCaffrey, obviously the highest valued running back in the league, no doubt, the highest value back in the league. They need to use Bijan even more, I feel like, in the passing game. He does good rushing, but he needs to do more in the passing game, which he's had reception yards, don't get me wrong, but it's not like anything like McCaffrey's done, where it's like, he needs to become a big enough threat to where you have Kyle Pitts able to make plays. You have Ritter not throwing as many, interceptions, in these games. And that is another reason I will rank them really low, is because Ritter hasn't proven that he cannot throw picks. In these last, couple games, he's thrown 3 picks this year, with a not that good, 62% completion percentage and 744 yards. Obviously, you have Bijan Robinson, Jonnu Smith, and then, even Algier. And it's like Algier is averaging just over 3. He's just averaging over 3 yards a carry. But it's kind of nuts to me. And this next week, they play the Texans. And the Texans are not even favored, even though the Falcons have looked really rough. And I think the Texans are going to give them a run for their money. I think that this game for the Texans is going to be that both of these teams are 2-2. The Falcons have had, Robinson has been doing good, but how much of it is garbage time and easy yards for him while the rest of the team struggles? And your quarterback hasn't shown that he can keep the ball safe. I think it is fortunate that Ritter has 3 interceptions this year, because he had one against us and he had 2 potential other ones, and he just has not thrown the ball that well this year, except to guys who are wide open, and seems to make foolish decisions, which I think, even though the Texans, are still young, they're still developing, and obviously, their newfound talent, it might have its up and downs, but it seems to me that CJ Stroud, looks like a very, very polished, quarterback with, 1,200 yards, 6 TDs, and 0 picks. I personally think that, he could definitely, and he has, roughly the same, completion percentage as Ritter. But he's obviously, he's got almost 500 yards over Ritter. And it's just not a good thing. I think that the game could come down to whether Ritter can get rid of his mistakes. So that's why I think the Falcons, aren't that great of a team. Is because if you tee up to Bijan, no matter how talented he is, and you force them to pass, I think that Ritter is susceptible to interceptions and poorly thrown balls. Moving on to my next team, I think I am going to cover the Panthers here. The Panthers, I think, they've kind of shocked, I guess, me, that their defense seems to have regressed, in my opinion, where they're not able to really stop teams that much. I think this is going to have to be another one of these where we shift this. But, I want to put the Panthers, pretty low, I guess. I think that this team, in the Falcons division, I think that they are low. They are down here as well. Looking at this, let me look at who we have, left to kind of put on here. We're going to do this where we move these up essentially one. But I think that when you look at the Panthers, I think that you look at a young QB that is going through growing pains, but has shown that he can play, really well. And that it's, Bryce Young, yeah, sure, he's got 2 TDs, 2 picks, only 500 yards, but his completion percentage is 65%. Or he doesn't really have, he has DJ Chark and Thielen, who obviously DJ Chark has not done well this year, only 7 receptions for 129 yards. Thielen, has been has formed a good rapport with Young. But this team just overall doesn't have, that much going for it. And the defense, just seems to me like they could overall, play better. I am going to put them here just above the Cardinals and below the Giants, excuse me. But they just seemingly, to me, are young and inexperienced, besides a few veterans. And they just don't really have that it factor on offense in order to really show what they have. Miles Sanders clearly, is missing the O-line of the Eagles. I think he came here because he thought that, oh, this is a younger team, that I can latch on to that might be able to be good, or wanted more money. And then Chuba Hubbard, 26 carries for 119 yards, with that average, maybe they should get him more involved. But yeah, overall, not a lot on offense. And I think that their defense isn't terrible, but I feel like towards the end of last year, this is a team that once they fired Matt Rule, the defense was playing scrappy and they were doing well against, teams that had good offenses. Like, I still remember that they had a shot to make the playoffs and they lost to, the Buccaneers. And, that was against Tom Brady. And regardless of whether you thought Tom Brady did bad last year, I mean, he still had a good number of yards and they were still a pretty good offense. And the Panthers, it was a close game. Enough said. But this team, I don't know if it's coaching, but they need to get it solved for their defense, in order for them to compete in more games. Moving on, the next team I am going to cover is the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, to me, have been doing well, but I just don't see them, doing well in the long run. I mean, it seems like it's, Baker's team potentially. But even then, it's like some missed throws, some missed opportunities. I don't want to put him too high because I think that, the inconsistencies there. And I think that they've kind of, I wouldn't say lucked out of some games, but, it's not super convincing to me that they are a really, really good team to be a top 10 team at this point. And obviously with Mike Evans' injury, even though Godwin produced a lot, I feel like, you don't have the the guy Brady, who obviously, read defenses really well. Not that I'm trying to toot his horn or anything, but, he just essentially made it a lot easier at getting it to guys. And I think that even Godwin has, I wouldn't say looked bad, but I think that his opportunities have dwindled because you don't have a QB that has the insane confidence and accuracy of Brady with Baker, which, isn't, a slight against Baker, but he's just not, that kind of QB. Like, he'll scramble, and I mean, he runs the ball pretty well and reads and, throws a pretty good ball, but I don't think that they're going to get that kind of elite level play from him right away after he's struggled for the last couple of years. But moving on, let me see who else we have remaining. Obviously, we are now to the top 10. Looking at the teams, I think I'll get this out of the way. I don't think there's much explanation for this. I think we're just going to go to the number 1, and that'll be the 49ers. I think that Shanahan, the way he's utilizing McCaffrey, this looks like a team, and I would bank on this team winning the Super Bowl. If I were to bet on who the Super Bowl winners were going to be right now, I would bet on San Fran, because even though the Cowboys, played really well, they obviously got stomped by the Cardinals, which is just kind of a red flag to me, and obviously only one team from the NFC can go, so I'm picking the better team in the Niners, and they just have a very complete team, good veterans, good youth talent, and just too many weapons on offense. And I think that Brock Purdy, with his accuracy and all that, I just think he's the perfect guy for that offense. I think he's like, the Jimmy Garoppolo upgrade that they needed, where, he just hits every throw and reads just as well, but he's obviously not costing them like anything right now, which is, allows them to surround him with this much talent with Kittle, Ayuk, Debo, and McCaffrey. And then a good offensive line with Trent Williams and, other guys. Like, too much star talent. There's a reason they had the most Pro Bowl. There's a reason they had the most Pro Bowl nominees last year, or even all pros. I can't remember which, but they easily had, the most Pro Bowl, I think, at least. Moving on, we're going to go to the number 2 team, and the reason I'm going to put this team here is because the Bills stomped and gave the Dolphins a major ass kicking. A major ass kicking. The Bills, Josh Allen now looks like he's a man on a mission to even become better than he was before. And I think the reason for that is opening night on the opening of the season, where it was, against the Jets. He had all the fumbles, had all the interceptions, and it was a disastrous collapse against a Jets team that logically should be 0-4 at this point. They should be 0-4. But they're 1-3. And it's like he's on, his own personal like quest to become, maybe even prove that he's better than Mahomes. Because I personally think that the upside for Allen is that he's way bigger, he's a better runner than Mahomes, has just as big of an arm. Like the two biggest arms in the NFL, I think, are Mahomes and Allen. And, he gets it done in so many ways. And he just has to get rid of his mistakes. And he could easily, I know it's going to sound biased for me to say it, but I think that Allen could be the best QB in the league if he plays well enough, without, committing his game-losing penalties, which, goodness. But yeah, he looks, locked in and ready to, destroy, just about any team. And the Dolphins, people have said that they have a decent defense. But it's like, they have let up, looking at this, they've let up, a good number of points. And it's like, I think there's only several teams that have let up more points than them. But obviously, they've scored 150, 70 of that coming from one game. But the Dolphins, have been really good. And moving on, I think, the next team that I want to say, is going to be on this list. And even though the Bills, had a loss, the next team is going to be the next undefeated team, and that is the Eagles. The Eagles don't look like the offensive unit you would want because they're not producing at such a high clip. But, you got to like their defense. You got to like the Jalen Carter pickup. Would have arguably been, a super high, pick if not for his off the field issues. And they made their defense more stacked somehow after it was already a really stacked defense last year, which is going to continue to get better throughout the year. So it's like, honestly, at this point, if I was pegging it, I would say there's going to be a rematch between San Fran and the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. And, I'll say this. I think the Niners win. I think that the Niners kind of got robbed the last championship game because they had the QB injuries. And no team's going to easily recover from that in a game with that much stake and that much talent on the field. You need everybody that, on your team that's been playing, even though Purdy didn't play the whole year, the final stretch of the year. But, I wouldn't be surprised if either team won because they are both playing incredibly well. But the Eagles are lesser than them on offense, even though their offense is still, doing enough for them to win. It could just be a little bit better. Now, the fourth team, I'm going to say the Cowboys, even though many people might be like, oh, wouldn't you take the Dolphins in this case? Wouldn't you take the Dolphins because they've, done really well? The reason I take the Cowboys is because the Cowboys don't look as much of a liability on defense, and they have the generational player. Once Ramsey comes back, yeah, you could say that maybe he, is a generational player, but maybe not. I really don't think Ramsey has, changed the game. Since he's been in the league, he's proven that he's, a good corner, but he hasn't really changed the game. And you look at this team and it's like, they look like they're, performing much better, this year, barring their one loss where, most teams can't even, it's crazy to me that they've already had, so many opportunistic plays. And that's just not something that I think the Dolphins have done very well. Like, I think the thing with the Dolphins is that it's mostly all offense with them. And while I am going to put them at 5 here, I think the Dolphins, it's a lot like last year, where I think the top 10 teams with the top 10 records or whatever it was, 10 weeks in, that you look at the Dolphins and, they are net positive by a lot this year, but, given that, that they could have, one game, that one game where it's like, ultimately they have a collapse or they're not able to score, or for whatever reason, I think that the Dolphins, they could easily falter. And, Tua even got beat up, this last week. They didn't look great, excuse me. And, how much is Tua going to be able to stay on his feet if the line starts, giving up pressure, I guess, game after game. But we'll see. They have a top 5 spot here because seemingly they can put up so many points that, their defense doesn't have to be great in order for them to win. But I just don't think it's a formula for a great team to have a defense that they only don't lose because they, stop on a couple of drives. Because look at what the Bills did. They clearly had a plan and they were able to, dominate the Dolphins, a team that, did well against them last year. Obviously the same division, those are always, grudgy games, but yeah, I think that the Dolphins, they could prove that they're, they could do a lot better once Ramsey comes back, but who knows if he's going to be up to form when he comes back. Moving on to the 6th team, this may shock a lot of people, but I am actually going to go with the Lions here. I think the Lions, it is crazy to me how much pressure they are forcing. Aiden Hutchinson has clearly proven that he's going to be an impact player in this league for a long time. And it's like I've told people, it's like that size, that speed, and he has the potential to be a game wrecker. He could, I don't think he doesn't have the speed of Micah Parsons, but he has, enough physicality that he can be just as disruptive. It's like, even if he doesn't get to the QB, it's hard to throw over him. He's 6'7", ridiculously big. Reminds me of Julius Peppers, which we all know how good he was in his prime for a long time. Because even if you don't get to the QB, if you're smart with your eyes, you can bat the passes down. And I think that the Lions O-line, even though how much I hate to say it, can carry them, through most games where it's like the defense can be opportunistic and then you can be running the ball quite a bit. But the Lions look, like a team ready to lay it all on the line for Dan Campbell. And he's done a great head coaching job. And I think that he's one of those that he also trusts his players and he shows his trust in them. Even when some of the times that he goes for it, I think it's kind of crazy. But I like the hints of cockiness that he does. And it's not like he does it all the time, showing that he has, no respect for other teams. I think that he's a very smart coach. But yeah, then this weekend it's like they're going up against the Panthers, which should be a win for them. I think that the Panthers are going to have a really hard time, and the Lions are going to be able to go and secure 4-1, leading them one step closer to a playoff berth with already half of the wins that they had last season, because I think that they had 8 wins last year. But yeah, I don't think that much needs to be said about the Lions. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown does well. I think that their their tight end that they drafted is looks like he's a bona fide good player. Yeah, Laporta, he looks like he's just balling out. It is hard to defend teams that have a guy as big as Laporta and then a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown that is constantly sneaking, poking, and prodding around the defense. But yeah, moving on to number 7, we have the I'm trying to think. I think this is because we only have 4 teams left. At number 7, I am going to put number 7. I'm actually going to go and I'm going to put the goodness, I'm sorry. I'm going to put the Seahawks here. I think the Seahawks really showed how good they can be, this last week. And obviously the Giants, it's it's not much to say about the the Seahawks, I think, have proved that they are opportunistic, that they have really good corners in Tariq Woolen and Witherspoon. And that, this last week, obviously the Giants' O-line hasn't been the best, but the Seahawks, have proved that once they get it clicking on offense, they are a tough team to stop. And I don't even think that we've seen the full extent of how good their offense can be, to be honest with you. I think that their defense could still need some work. It's only one game. You don't want them to get too cocky, and they definitely looked like a really bad team, their first game of the season, I remember. And it's like they're not putting up, the amount of points I think that this offense is capable of. But it's not a paltry amount by any means. But I think that they can be better, but I think that they're in a good spot right now where they can start to prove what kind of, team they are. And that I think that this is a team that they look like they have the amount of talent that like the Dolphins have on offense, a good running back in Kenneth Walker the third, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Lockett, and then of course DK Metcalf. And Geno Smith, if he keeps throwing at the clip that he is with the completion percentage, he is just gonna tear apart defenses where he has so many targets that nobody's gonna know how they're gonna cover everybody because of how much talent they have on this team. So that's why I'm putting the Seahawks at 7. Moving on to number 8, I am going to put the Chiefs here. That's who I was kind of arguing with. And the main reason why I'm putting the Chiefs here is due to what I said, is that their offense just doesn't look. It just doesn't look polished, and it doesn't look like the Chiefs offense that we know. And this last game that they had, they could have had another one of these games where they potentially, lost to a team that they shouldn't have. The Jets, essentially kind of, they shot themselves in the foot with how they finished the game with the penalty and that sort of thing. And goodness, Kansas City, I think this has been their lowest point in years. I think that, these last few years, they have been top of the AFC, usually top 2, if not 3 in the league, where it's like, the only team I remember from last year that you could argue was maybe the Eagles, and then maybe not even the Niners, to be honest with you, because they only popped off later in the year. And then you also look at the I guess, the Bills. They've looked like they've been on the cusp of being the best. And even the Bengals, look how far they've fallen, obviously. I think the Bengals, they've really fallen off and they look really inconsistent. But, when Joe Burrow is hot, he's hot. And those are the only teams that I really think about that, could possibly be the top, at the top of the league these last few years over the Chiefs, potentially. But even then, it's like you really didn't wager against the Chiefs. But, there's not much to say about them. They still have Mahomes. People say he hasn't looked like himself, and maybe that's true. But yeah, it's crazy to me that he had so many picks, I guess, in this last game, proving, the Jets do have a good, stout defense, but it's still unlike Mahomes to, have multiple picks. Like, I think they said it was the 3rd time in his career where he had a multiple picks in one quarter. But, he's definitely the kind of guy that I think he's going to correct it, or he's going to throw the ball away more. But yeah, the Chiefs, crazy how inconsistent they've been, but they've still won games and that sort of thing. But moving on to number 9, the 2 teams that are left are the Browns and the Ravens. The Ravens obviously are going to be higher than the Browns, beating them this last week. I did not think that the Ravens were going to handle them the way that they needed to. And it's kind of crazy because you look at the Browns, and they seemingly were looking like they, would run away with this, this past year. But, and that they were going to run away with the division, to be honest with you. The Browns, the way that they were playing. But you've had some inconsistencies. Deshaun Watson clearly didn't play, which I think really hurt the Browns, even though Watson hasn't been playing the best. But the Browns, I think, can bounce back. They clearly have a really good defense. Looking at them, I hope that, Watson can come back, because this team, they were banking on having him. And just overall, I think that, him being injured and just being a surprise no-go really killed this team. So yeah, crazy, obviously, that we have these 2 here. Obviously, the Browns, they still have an incredible defense. An incredible defense that can win them games. And, I'm going to continue to expect them to kind of win games, because they have the potential to just take the ball away and do, some crazy things. And it's not like without Nick Chubb, they can't, do that. But yeah, obviously losing Nick Chubb and then not having Watson play, who's going to be the leader of that offense? You've got, I forget how to pronounce his name, the tight end, but he doesn't really seem like that much of a leader. He doesn't seem like that much of a leader to me, I guess. And yeah, I can't remember his, how to say his name, to be honest, right now, but then there's Amari Cooper, who's obviously probably the veteran presence in there now. But ultimately, if you don't have a quarterback who's a leader, there's going to be a lot of doubt in the offense. And, the Browns, they could definitely easily move down depending on how long Watson's out, how they look after having, if he doesn't play this week, and depending on how they look, they could easily move down. But the Browns, I was thinking like, oh, this is the legit Browns team. They could be really good this season. Obviously, the blow to Chubb is big, but, the blow to Watson after that is just not good. But I still think they're really good because their defense is just absolutely, it's dangerous. But, this is my tier list. Tell me what you guys think. Sorry, I kind of got, distracted for a minute there. The dog was barking, but overall, I hope that, if you have any disagreements with this, then definitely post them down in the comments, and I'll try to respond to comments if anybody posts. But otherwise, thank you for watching the my first tier list for the 2023 NFL season. And now moving on, we are now going to look at Thursday night football. Now, obviously, I'm trying to remember who plays, I guess, at this point, but we have, Bears Commanders. The Bears obviously coming off a disappointing loss to the Broncos, but looking like they should use Justin Fields with his mobility more. And it's like, you can't go against the nature of a QB. And it's hard for, any QB to adopt a new system and then to also adopt a new system as well as, develop a different skill set, especially in a league like the NFL, where it's like that's ultimately a crapshoot. And it just doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me, to be honest with you, where, why would you, change this guy? Still, the crazy thing about this year that I think about is that Fields has 861 yards, 7 TDs, and 5 interceptions. I feel like the TDs haven't come that easily to teams and, QBs this year. But the fact that Fields has 7, yes, he has 5 picks, but, he's, that's still a pretty good number of yards. And especially considering that their run game isn't doing very well. Khalil Herbert with 196, and then Fields second with 134. And he's finally started to really connect with DJ Moore, I think. DJ Moore is such a reliable wide receiver, does great catches, is very athletic. And then, Cole Kmet kind of coming into his own, being the security blanket for Fields in this last game especially. And we look at the opposing QB, Howell, who is passing at 67%, which is higher than him, and he does have 961 yards, but he also has 5 picks and then 4 TDs over 4 games, obviously. You look at Robinson Robinson on the Commanders, and he has 261 yards, and 3 TDs on 61 attempts. And then Howell himself has, 11, carries for 82 yards, showing that he has athletic ability as well, which is good. But then, yeah, Scary Terry has been I think he's had kind of a down year. He's either on fire in some of these games, like the game that I think about is, the game against the Broncos where this team came back and ultimately, beat the Broncos and upset them when they were down a fat margin. And then Curtis Samuel. Looking at some of the other stats of these teams, Washington has 89 points scored this season, while Chicago has 75. Chicago has a very slim 50-yard margin for rushing yards, and then passing yards, they have 60 less than Washington. So, the amount of yards that these offenses have put up is very similar. And each team 3 fumbles, each team 5 picks. Sacks allowed, Chicago has had 17, which is 7 less than Washington's 24. Third down efficiency is pretty low for each team. Chicago at 38% and Washington at 33. But I guess, looking at this, each team is also very similar defensively. So we could get a very, spicy game, but the thing that I think about with Washington is that they do have 13 sacks on the year, which is, 3 a game, a little more than 3 a game technically. But and then the other thing is that Chicago has a 58% on allowed third down efficiency to Washington's 39. I think that Washington does hold the edge in this game. Obviously, they're 2-2 and the Bears are 0-4. If we see the Bears of last week and they play the whole game, perhaps Fields will be more mobile, to be able to get away from the pass rushers like Sweat, Payne, and then Chase Young. But overall, I think that Chicago's going to have to play a lot of short ball, which I think that they are built for. I think that DJ Moore can do really well out of the slot. Darnell Mooney isn't exactly a big wide receiver. Not a slot wide receiver, but he's not a big guy. Does, run and get open downfield, and then you have Cole Kmet. But I think that ultimately what's going to end up happening, because you're not going to be able to run very well on the Commanders either. They have a really stout run defense. I think that you look at this and you look at, the teams, and I think that the Bears fall up short, partially because it isn't even at their stadium, so they're not going to have the home crowd like they did last week against the Broncos. And the Commanders, I think Scary Terry's going to be able to have a really, really good game. And I think that, Howell and McLaurin are, going to further develop their connection so that they're going to continue to produce. I'm not going to say that Fields and Moore can't, but they just don't have the pass rush really on the Bears that's going to be able to, get to Howell and really force him to make bad throws as much as the Commanders are going to be able to do to Fields, because I think that they have 2 very good edge rushers that are going to do a good job of containing Fields. But let me pull up the injury report here. So yeah, I'm already looking at this, and apparently Eddie Jackson is still out, which is not good. Well, Scary Terry is crazy good downfield, and overall it just does not look good. Let's look at the Commanders, see if there's anybody on their team. There is Chris Rodriguez, who's questionable, but otherwise nobody else on their team, has a game status. And I mean, yeah, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel having a slight quad, I guess, where he was limited, is slightly troubling, but I think that Scary Terry, he's handled, so many loads in his career that it's kind of like, what are you going to do against Scary Terry? And I mean, here, let me look at the Bears injury report real quick. So, yeah, Claypool is out. That's another story that I'm not going to get much into, but it seems like there's the potential that he might get traded or even cut from the team because of the way that, he's interviewed with his immaturity. And then you have Eddie Jackson out, the most veteran DB on the team. Jalen Johnson being out is not good either because they really don't have, that many, corners. Jaquan Brisker with a hammy, he's listed as questionable, was only limited on Wednesday today. But yeah, otherwise, other than that, no other injuries. Tevin Jenkins is listed with a calf injury, but he was a full practice Monday, Tuesday, and today. But yeah, like I said, looking at the Commanders, the only one that's questionable is Rodriguez Jr., the running back, and he has an illness. So I feel like he plays. If he wakes up feeling fine, like he plays. It's a physical thing, but it's not like an actual like injury. He's sick or something. But yeah, overall my analysis for this is that because of this, I think that, the Bears are they're still young. The O-line has been a problem there, and the Commanders' strength of their defense is their D-line, where they can attack you from multiple different directions. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be a super high scoring game, honestly, because I think that the Commanders still don't have a ton of weapons. But I do think that it could be I think I'm going to take the Commanders with 27 to the Bears 21. A little bit of deja vu for them because I think that's what they scored against the Broncos. But yeah, overall, let me know what you think, after this video is out. And I think that's going to about cover it. If anybody wants to answer any questions, now is the time. Like I said earlier, if you disagreed with my not my injury report, my power rankings injury report. Yeah, I guess it is an injury report, adding injury to these bottom teams in the league. But yeah, overall, I want to thank you guys for watching this edition of Cast, and I'll see you next time, which will be on Saturday. Thank you all for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.